All right, so ratios are just a way of dividing what you have into equal parts. And from those equal parts, you can distribute them in an unequal way, right? So say you have 5 things to distribute, okay? But you get 3 and you get 2 of them. You're getting their equal sized amounts, right? But you're not going to distribute them equally. So we're going to talk a little bit about ratios and what they are and how to, and how to simplify them. So what you have with a ratio is you have several shares, several equal shares. So keep in mind that they need to stay equal. Several equal shares, right? But different distributions. So the pieces are the same size, but not everybody gets the same number of pieces. Make sense? All right. So we've got a couple of different things we want to talk about. First of all, we want to look at the notation. There are several different ways to write a ratio. The classic way is to write it as a fraction. But you will also see a semicolon. This book likes semicolons quite a lot. Okay? Or you can see the word to. So A to B. And all of those are ways to write a ratio. You might remember from your study of numbers that ratio simply means a comparison. That's what a fraction is. Fractions are rational numbers. They can be written as a fraction. So all these are different ways to write ratios. Yes?
Does it mean that a fraction and a ratio is like the same thing?
Exactly the same thing.
So you can write a fraction as like with the same.
You can, but you'll see that sometimes you'll have more than 2 items comparing, and that's why they'll go back to the colon. I'm sorry, not semicolon, but to the colon, because if you have more items, then there's not enough places to put them in a fraction. But yes, you can absolutely write a ratio as a fraction, and we're going to talk about that. Okay, just like fractions, you must always simplify. And it means to simplify in exactly the same process, okay? All you're going to do is divide out any common factors. We've talked about that when we talked about simplify. A factor means anything that divides evenly. And if it's common, that means it has to divide into how many of them? Both of them or all of them if you have more than 2. Yeah, you bet. Okay? And we want to always make sure that we look at the numbers again. So if you divide by 2, look at them again to see if maybe they'll divide by 3, which means they were originally divided by 6. Right? Make sure you're taking out the most things possible. So sometimes you might have to divide a second time. Now, when you're doing that and there's only 2 numbers, remember you can just put that in your calculator and hit execute, and it'll simplify it for you. But if you have more than 2, then you just need to look to see what factors are common. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to use them and how to simplify them. So we start with simplifying. So let's just, if you look on at your book on page, what is that, 48? There you are, some examples of ratios. Notice this one has 3 and this one's simplified. Okay. So write the ratios and the following ratios in their simplest form. So 6 and 4, 6 to 4. What number will divide evenly into both of those at the same time? They'll both divide by 2, and so when you divide both of them by 2, you get 3 to 2. Right? So it's exactly the same idea that we used for fractions. Okay. Here, if you look at number 2, it has 3 numbers. They all end in 0, so it's obvious that we'll divide into them. 10. So if you divide them by 10, you get 10, 7, and 3. Is there anything that'll divide into 10, 7, and 3? No. So that's the reduced fraction, or the reduced ratio, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay? So you're just going to do exactly the same thing that you did with fractions. Now, one thing that is odd about them, because we just said a ratio is a fraction, but you're not allowed to have fractions as a ratio. Okay? So if you see this one, we need to change that. And we need to change it by eliminating the fractions. And this is something that you're going to use when you're working on equations later in algebra, so it's a great skill to practice. So let's talk about how you can clear fractions. To clear the fractions, first, convert any mixed numbers. So remember, like if you have 1 and 1/2, that's, you take the denominator times the whole number and add that total to the numerator. So 2 times 1 is 2, plus another 1 makes 3 over 2. Remember how to do that? So just multiply the denominator times the whole number. You don't need to write this if you don't need to. Add that product, and yes, I'm always going to use math words where I can. Product is the answer when you multiply. Good. To the numerator, then put that sum over the original denominator. Okay? So if you've forgotten how to do that, just a little bit of a reminder. Okay. Second, multiply each fraction by the LCD. Okay? And when you do that, we know that the LCD is a number that they divide evenly into, right? And so when we multiply by the LCD, what's going to happen is the denominators are going to divide away. And then all that's left is just a whole number. Okay? And you can use that same pattern that we learned before. Divide, then multiply. If you remember that, it's LCD divided by the denominator, and then take whatever that quotient is times the numerator. So that same pattern works again, which is one reason why I want you to learn it, because it's very, very useful. So let's just look at that one that we had. What was it? It was 1/2 and 3/4. So we have 1/2 and 3/4. We want to simplify that, which means we can't have any fractions. What's the LCD for 2 and 4? Careful. Not common factor, but least common denominator. So it's always as big as the biggest one, right? So 2 and 4, it has to be 4. So we'll just multiply them both by 4. Now, multiplying that by 4, you could put it over 4 over 1 and then simplify. What will it divide into both of those? 2, right? And then simplify. But watch what happens when you do it using that divide then multiply. It just makes your life, just makes it a lot faster. 4 divided by, what's my original denominator? 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. Fraction's gone. Now let's see the other one. 4 divided by 4 is 1 times 3 is, and there's your simplified ratio. Okay? Yes?
Could you put the explanation for the second point?
Sure. Multiply each fraction by the LCD? Sure. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's take a look at another one. So look at one where you have 3 fractions. So we have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4. Simplify this ratio, which means get rid of the fractions. So, and in order to do that, I need an LCD. What is the LCD for 2, 3, and 4? Yeah, so take 2, 3, and 4. They don't have anything in common, so but 2 and to all of them, 2 of them will divide by 2. Multiply that all together, and it's going to give you an LCD of 12. If you don't remember that, go back and look at finding LCDs, right? We looked at how to do that by hand, using that upside down division or any other method you prefer. Now we're going to multiply each one of them by 12. So I'm going to just put a 12 on the outside and multiply. That means multiply times all of them on the outside of a bracket. We're doing is that divide then multiply pattern. So 12 divided by 2 is 6 times 1 is 6. 12 divided by 3 is 4 times 1 is 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3 times 1 is 3. Is there anything that will divide into all of them? Nope. So there's your answer. Remember, you can't simplify anything unless you can simplify them all. Okay? So you will clear the fractions, which is probably the best reason for working with ratios, is just to have some practice clearing those fractions. Okay? Now, let's talk about, so that's simplifying. Let's find out about calculating a ratio. So let's just go to number 1 on the next page. And look at finding a ratio and what you're going to do. Okay? Well, actually, we should do steps first, shouldn't we? Okay. To calculate a ratio. Again, very simple. First, okay, find the sum of the parts. Sum means you're adding. So say I gave this student 3 pieces of candy, this student 5 pieces of candy, so I gave out 5 total pieces of candy, right? So that's the sum of the parts. Sum means you're just going to add them together, yeah? Then we'll divide the total by that sum. Say, for example, in that candy example, I wanted to know how much I was going to spend on each one of them. Then that total price for 5 pieces of candy, we would divide by 5 to find out how much each one piece cost. Right? So divide that. So whatever you get for that sum, that's going to be your divisor. You're going to divide that number by that. And then it's simply a matter of calculate each share. This is one of those cases where writing it out, it seems a lot more complicated than it is. All right? Now, with these coming from these word problems like this, though, you're going to have to think about which thing is your parts. But it's, again, usually very straightforward. You'll get used to it quite quickly. And they're going to help you with that because for some reason they give you like 15 of these to do. So you'll get a lot of practice. All right, so let's just go to number 1 and think about these parts. So calculate first of all, you're going to find the sum of the parts, then use that, then divide by that number, and then calculate each share, right? So let's just look at what that means. So looking at this one, $45 needs to be split between 2 people in the ratio of 2 to 3. So $45 is how much we're splitting. And we're not splitting it equally amongst 2 people. One person is going to get 2 shares, the other is going to get 3 shares, right? So first, calculate the total number of parts by adding the numbers in each share. Well, if one gets 2 and the other gets 3, 2 and 3, of course, combine to make 5, right? Then we're going to calculate the value of each part by dividing the total amount by the number of parts. So we were dividing $45 into 5 equal parts. So 45 divided by 5 is 9. And then we're going to calculate the value of each share by multiplying the parts and the value of each part. So remember, the first person was getting 2 shares. So 2 shares of $9 is $18. The second one got 3 shares. So 3 shares of $9 is $27. It's pretty straightforward, but you need to practice it to make sure you remember how to make everything work. Look at this one. Annie, Amira, and Amelia paint their grandmother's fence. She will pay them a total of $180. Annie works for 5 hours, Amira for 4 hours, but Amelia gets bored and leaves after 3 hours. how much should each one get paid? So just think about how much they worked. First one worked 5 hours, then 4 hours, then 3 hours, for a total of 12 hours of work. Yeah? She was going to pay $180, so we divide that by the 12, which means $15 per hour. Yeah? So the first one got 5 shares of 15, so 5 times 15 means she earned $75. The second one got 4 shares, so 4 times 15 means she got $60. And finally, the last one got 3 shares of 15, or $45. Make sense? Pretty easy. So let's just pop down to one of these. Sam and Sarah pool their money to buy a $3 bag of lollies. So the total bag costs $3, right? Sam gave $2 and Sarah gave $1. If there are 51 lollies in the bag, okay, well, ignore the $3 because now we have a new total. 51 lollies in the bag, how many should each get? So first of all, let's calculate the ratio. They didn't give us a ratio here, but it's easy to find because Sam gave $2 and Sarah gave $1. So what ratio would that be? 2 to 1. Okay, which is a total of 3 shares, right? So we take our 51 lollies and divide them by 3. What's that going to give us? 17. Good. So now we just calculate the ratios. He had 2 17s, so 2 times 17, which is going to give us what? 34. And she had 1, so 1 times 17, of course, is 17. So he got 34 lollies, and she gets 17. Notice the units. There are never any units when you're talking about a ratio, but your answer 99% of the time will include units. You make sure you put those units in. If you're doing this on an assessment, you usually have to answer the question as a full sentence. Okay? And we'll warn you of that. All right. Okay. Let's look at another one. Do y'all have that one down? If I push this button, it's all going to go away. Okay. Doesn't matter. Do you see another one you want to do? Pardon? You want to do number 2? A recipe requires 2 parts of liquid for every 3 parts of dry ingredients. If Hazel wants to make a total of 2.5 cups, how much of each type of ingredient will she need? Okay? So what's our ratio if she's got 2 parts liquid and 3 parts dry? 2 to 3. Excellent. Okay? Now, so that makes a total of 5 parts, yes? And we have 2.5 cups. But I can't divide 2.5 cups with it in that form. I'm first going to have to change it from a mixed number to a fraction, an improper fraction. So 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5 over 2, right? And we're going to divide that by how many parts? 5. Remember we did division with fractions. Can you divide fractions? No, you need to change it to multiply by the reciprocal. So it becomes 5 over 2 times 1 over 5. The 5s will divide away, and that gives you 1/2. So each part is 1/2. Okay? So it's 2 times 1/2 gives you 1 cup of liquid. Right? Just multiplying each number of the ratio times the fraction. And 3 times 1/2 gives you 3/2 cups of dry ingredients, whatever these are. Now, because we started off with a mixed number as in our original, they're probably going to want one in their answer. To me, 3/2 is perfectly fine, but what should you make it? Since they started off with mixed numbers, 1.5 cups of dry. And again, we usually do mixed numerals for word problems. We would never do it if it was just a straight mathematical sentence, because you can't use 1.5. You'd have to convert it to use it. But for an answer, it makes more sense, right? You wouldn't say 7/2 hours, right? Okay. So you'd say 3.5 hours. Makes more sense to us when you're answering a question with them. Okay? How are they looking? Pretty straightforward. Now, the math is easy. You need a lot of practice because in my experience, what happens is you just forget what to do when you get there to see them. Okay? So practice those steps. First, add them together. Add the two ratios together. Make sure you simplify them first because you would rather work with smaller numbers than bigger numbers, right? Add them together. Divide the total by that number, by that sum, and then calculate each part. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do the simplifying and calculating, so pages 48 through 50.